Joined now in Studio 3 by State Auditor Diana DiZoglio and our attorney, Shannon Liss-Riordan. Yesterday, they appeared before the state's highest court, the SJC, in the latest chapter of the auditor's effort to honor the voters' will from a year and a half ago, which would end up auditing the legislature, which 72% of the people voted for. Shannon, auditor, good to see you both. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Jim.
So, General DiZoglio, I think you made any progress yesterday before the SJC?
We were very pleased with the questions and the discussion amongst the members of the SJC. We thought their questions were very thoughtful and very thorough. They had clearly read all the documents. They had clearly read all of the records that were provided to them, and I thought that was good to see, that they had a deep knowledge that they exhibited about the documents that they read, and their discussion topics reflected that knowledge. And I think that, they asked some good questions of us. They asked some good questions of the Attorney General, and it seems clear to me that they are interested in moving this case forward, finding resolution, and make sure that the question with respect to the audit law actually is able to get resolved by the SJC and is no longer able to be stonewalled.
Well, Shannon, could you explain, clearly as one can, what is before the SJC and what is not before the SJC in terms of the goal of the voters to have the legislature be audited by Diana DiZoglio's office? What are they deciding?
So what's before the SJC right now is whether this case can even move forward. So the auditor has been trying to enforce this law for more than a year, almost a year and a half now. And so because she never got the green light from the Attorney General, she went ahead and had her office file the complaint itself. The Attorney General tried to block the case from going forward by moving to strike the complaint. So what the argument was about yesterday was whether the Attorney General could just block this case from even moving forward. And we were very pleased with the questions that the justices asked. It seemed very clear that they do believe this case needs to move forward one way or another. So we're very pleased.
And
with
you're
how
just
it looked.
so I'm clear, you're saying that if the attorney, I believe you're saying, the auditor's office, you as the lawyer in this case, that if the Attorney General is not willing to represent you, and we'll explain in a minute what she says are the reasons why she's been hesitant, that then the court should allow a special counsel to be appointed to represent the auditors so they can sue the legislature if they choose to for noncompliance. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is the issue. The point that was being argued yesterday was whether the Attorney General could just block this case altogether, whether her motion to strike the complaint would be granted. And the justices seemed frustrated that this case wasn't moving forward.
Can we play a little sound? Yeah, that, go ahead.
We've got, this is Supreme Judicial Court Justice Gabriel Wallahojan raising the idea of setting deadlines for Diana DiZoglio to answer questions and for Andrea Campbell to decide whether she will represent her. Here it is.
It is hard for me, looking at the history of correspondence, to think that an order might be useful if we're just going to repeat the same cycle of unproductive communications. It seems to me perhaps that a deadline would have to be set by which the Attorney General would fish or cut bait, to use, common phrase. Is that the kind of thing that you see as being reasonable? And if so, what date would that be?
It does seem to those of us who've been watching from the sidelines here, we talked to you, then we talked to the Attorney General, then we talked to you and the Attorney General. We never seem to be making any progress on this. So does that deadline seem reasonable?
I would like a more swift deadline to occur, 7 to 10 days, but I'll take 30 days because it's better than this never-ending pursuit of justice. And I think that, you had it right, Jim, when you recommended that we actually work together with Judge Gertner. And Margie, I think you agreed with that.
We should explain. Judge Gertner offered to be a mediator here between both sides. You agreed to it, and the Attorney General.
But now the SJC is essentially looking to play a similar role, not necessarily a mediator, but a role of trying to assist in making sure that this is moving forward. They said, clearly there's a communication breakdown. You're saying this, she's saying that. And I think that rather get involved in a she said dispute, which they did not seem interested in, rightly so, I would say, they are looking to try to get to the point, which is how do we get this audit law enforced that the people decided? They recognized it multiple times yesterday when they sat there and said, look, it's very clear that this is the issue. People did vote on this. There needs to be a resolution. This court decides the constitutionality, not the Attorney General's office. And even if our office and the AG's office have a dispute, there does need to be resolution to that at some point, and we agree. So I think that it was a great recommendation that a time constraint be placed on that the Attorney General's office fish or cut bait, according to that justice, and that we get an answer once and for all. Are you going to represent these issues, or are you going to represent the legislature? Now, I will just end with this, and I know you want to ask something,
Yeah.
but the Attorney General has already been on the record representing the legislature now. So one of the justices, Justice Kafka, I believe it was, did point to the fact that, you know, even though the Attorney General said that they would too potentially be amenable to some sort of a deadline and some sort of a resolution being required, that he did look and say, well, it is kind of, you know, a little bit of an awkward situation because, you know, you're clearly working with the legislature. We've clearly recognized that they've already chosen to side with the legislature in this case. So certainly they're not able to represent us simultaneously. But I think that the
What does
justices
that
were
mean?
saying,
Wait.
Yeah.
If it within, let's assume the court orders this 30-day thing, and the Attorney General says, okay, I've used the 30 days, we will represent the auditor's office. Are you comfortable having her represent you based
No.
on what you just said?
No, I'm not.
So what happens then?
So she would need to appoint a SAG or not appoint a SAG.
Special-
Or she would need to just decide to take the case forward on her own and sue the legislature on her own, which she would be able to do.
Okay, so Shannon Liss-Riordan, let's assume the 30 days passes and the flip side happens. The Attorney General says, based upon my consideration of the facts, I am not going to represent the Attorney General, the auditor's office. What happens then? You continue to say we want her to appoint a special counsel?
Right. If the Attorney General, I mean, the reason that this case has been stuck is because the Attorney General has never explicitly said yes or no. But as I told the justices yesterday, effectively, she has said no because she's never said yes, and it's been a year and a half. So it looks like she's going to be put to the test of actually making a decision. And if she decides not to pursue this case herself, which would seem odd given her prior statements and her representing the legislature, then the proper course would be to allow another counsel to represent the auditor. That would probably be through a special attorney general.
We're talking to Shannon Liss-Riordan, who's in the private sector, who, by the way, ran for the nomination for Attorney General against Andrea Campbell. Does that give you any satisfaction yesterday? Tell the truth.
I'm just saying I'm back to my job being a private attorney general, and I would be very pleased to represent the auditor in this
Well,
important
that's not
case.
an answer. Okay.
I will say I'm very
And-
grateful, and I loved seeing Attorney Liss-Riordan there yesterday representing the people's wishes.
Do you
It was
find
good
it
to see
weird?
her there.
Do you find it weird, by the way, that virtually every Republican elected official in the state and every Republican candidate, as far as I know, supports your position, and virtually every Democratic elected official, with very few exceptions, every Democratic candidate opposes or is at least silent on your position, and you're a Democrat. Is that weird?
No, it's not weird. This is a nonpartisan issue, and I think that the reality is that the Democrats actually really strongly support this. You can see that at the Democratic convention when I go and we get a standing ovation.
I mean, rank and file Democrats.
Yes, when
yeah.
we talk about the audit, and then the Republican convention, you saw a lot of support for the audit as well. People might like me personally or not like me personally, but one thing most people agree on is that they love the idea of the audit of the legislature, and they do want my office to conduct that audit, and that is bringing people together. And I've always said, look, I will talk to anybody who's willing to work with us on these issues to get these issues moved forward, and that takes working in a nonpartisan fashion a lot of times. And I can have an opinion about something different, so can you. But if we agree on this issue, we should move on that. And I have been able to work together with my Republican colleagues on these types of issues with respect to transparency, and my progressive colleagues
The
on these
leading
types of
Republican
issues.
candidate for governor agreed to fund the whole operation here.
Yeah, and now we were grateful for that offer.
Okay.
We ultimately decided to go with Attorney Shannon Liss-Riordan, and clearly she's done a fantastic job at representing us. But yes, it was nice to hear that we have support from all sides. Shannon is a progressive Democrat. the candidate for governor is a Republican, and there you see it.
That's
You
Mike
have
Minogue,
a
for
progressive
those who don't
Democrat
know.
and a Republican both agreeing on an issue.
Every time we talk about the legislature, Jim likes to point out their 5-month vacation, and I like to point out that they're the least productive and most secretive legislature probably in the entire country. I mean, I think if you are paying attention in Massachusetts, you may be very annoyed at the way the legislature does not perform. Seems to, it has, pays money to committee chairs, and there aren't any meetings for the committee chairs, and all these kind of shenanigans that go on. And whenever we talk about this on the radio, I mean, we get tons of text messages because people are really upset about this. Those who are paying attention, we voted for this 72%, and nothing's happening. So, why do you think this has become such an endless quagmire?
I mean, we cited this in the briefing to the court that Massachusetts, even though it's seen as such a blue state, it ranks at the bottom or near the bottom of all states across the country for legislative transparency. This is a huge issue, and again, it's not a partisan issue. It's just a fact, and there is a lot that can be approved here. So that's why we have this article of our Constitution, Article 48, that allows the people to be a co-equal participant in making laws. So here, 72% of the voters voted for this law that the legislature obviously was not going to allow itself or pass itself.
And I've said this 1,000 times on the show because I used to do with ballot questions. A law passed by the voters under Article 48 has the exact same force and effect as a law passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Shannon Liss-Riordan.
Absolutely. And it also, I'll just say, it is the Attorney General's job to enforce the law of the Commonwealth. So that's just another thing very disappointing here is that, and the argument that we made was that the Attorney General was abdicating her responsibility by not enforcing the law of the Commonwealth. If she doesn't like the law, if she finds it repugnant, if she thinks it's unconstitutional.
She voted for it, she told us.
She said that, but then she's been blocking in court its enforcement. So that's why it's absolutely essential that this case go forward one way or another. And if the Attorney General is not going to enforce the will of the people, then another attorney needs to be allowed to do that.
So do you think there's some deep, dark secrets that they don't want you to know, or do you think they just don't like you, Diana? They don't want anybody looking at the books here.
It's all of that
It's
together.
all of that. Okay.
They don't like me. And I think that there are some things that might prove unflattering, potentially, right? I can't allege that that's definitely the case, but of course it's a concern. When we look at different records, we look at things like those settlement agreements and those non-disclosure agreements,
which
right?
really get people going,
Yes.
I think. Explain those.
So the settlement agreements that can include non-disclosure agreements can silence people about workplace abuse, harassment, discrimination, or potential corruption being hidden. We have seen different state agencies use even over $1 million to settle different cases and different allegations with folks who have alleged very bad behavior going on, unlawful and unethical behavior going on. We saw at the at Massport recently, they had over $1 million settlement with non-disclosure language that they had entered into regarding some allegations over there that were very concerning. At the Convention Center Authority, they previously had a $1.2 million settlement that they entered into because of allegations of racial discrimination and retaliation. And, these agreements are able to be entered into. I know that the legislature has used non-disclosure agreements through the years. Remember my story? I got one years and years ago. They keep saying that they haven't, but yet they really don't want us to be able to look at those things. So it's that, but it's also, Marjorie, just state contracts, procurement documents, right? The records about how they are giving away contracts to people in the potentially millions of taxpayer dollars. We had a Senate issue that I raised in a hearing recently when I was testifying in support of our public records ballot question, which I'm asking everyone to please vote yes.
Potentially on this year's ballot.
Yes, it will be on this year's ballot. Please vote yes on an act to increase access to public records, to subject the legislature and governor's office to the public records law. But when I went before the courts, when I went before the legislative committee to testify on that ballot question, I raised that it was flagged to me that the Senate had reported on the comptroller's website that they had entered into some sort of contracting regarding employee contracts of some sort, but they didn't list a vendor, and that there was over $1 million in funding that was allocated to this, but they didn't even list a vendor. Now, that could have been a mistake or an oversight, or it could have been purposeful, but we just don't know.
We only have a minute and a half left here. By the way, in the House and the Senate budget proposals, Did they cut your budgets? Did the House or Senate cut your budget?
They funded it
Quickly.
around 1%. The governor funded ours at, I believe, over 3%. And the legislature decided to try to fund our budget at roughly 1%. I believe the AG saw 4 or 5% in a proposed
So less
increase.
than other
So,
constitutional officers.
Of course.
Shannon Liss-Riordan, again, without me losing the audience, the argument the Attorney General has regularly made here is that the auditor's demand in terms of what she wants to audit is a moving target. That it's this, then it's that, then it's this. Was that, and your contention is she's been asking for the exact same things over and over and over
The
again.
auditor.
Did the auditor, did the SJC, did the justices seem to acknowledge that, or is that still in dispute?
No, some of the justices did seem to acknowledge it, that it was very clear through more than a year of correspondence that the auditor was looking to begin an audit with these particular categories of documents, and this case would be about those documents. Other documents, that's not this case. And the SJC said just last week in giving an advisory opinion, giving the green light for the public records ballot initiative to go forward, they said that hypothetical issues in the future they can't even opine on. So right now we're just talking about these initial document requests that the legislature is
When do we
refusing to
expect?
comply
We only have
with.
15, when do we expect a decision on them?
I'd expect pretty soon, given what they said yesterday.